Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Dr. Dan Pardi is the Chief Health Officer at Qualia Life Sciences, where he leads health education, protocol design, and health improvement strategies. His work centers on translating cutting edge science into actionable information and programs that support health span optimization and peak performance. Previously, Dan founded humanOS.me, a digital health platform developed with over 100 health science professors. Its podcast, humanOS Radio, became the official podcast of the Sleep Research Society and a content partner of the Buck Institute for Research on Aging. He also served as a chief health architect at Restore Hyper Wellness, where he led new product strategy and served as key authority for intervention sciences. Through Vivendi Health, Dan provides bespoke counseling to individuals and organizations facing unique health challenges. He holds a PhD in Cognitive Neuroscience from Leiden University and Stanford and a master's in Exercise Physiology from Florida State. He's spoken at TEDx and the Institute for Human Machine Cognition, among others. You can find Dr. Pardi at www.qualialife.com. Dr. Dan Pardi, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you so much for having me on, Casey. I'm delighted to be here. I've looked forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I have as well. We are going to be doing a deep dive into creatine and creatine research, which, we talk about a lot on the show, but we've never done an official deep dive onto it. And you're the best person I can think of to be able to do it. You're so knowledgeable. You made an incredible product that I've been using. And so I really appreciate it. I'm really glad you took some time out of your busy life to be on our show today. You are not the only person to do this, but it seems like you're somebody from California who took a trip to Austin and decided not to leave.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why people did leave
Yep.
California. We weren't in the group of people who were like, oh, we got to get out of here. Northern California is beautiful. We've got friends and family there, but a job opportunity did take me there during the pandemic. And frankly, my family and I were thinking, well, we'll be here for a few years, then we can go back home. And we loved Austin so much that we've reoriented our life. So we actually leave over the summers and go back and visit California, which is really nice. So we have an arrangement now that is what you might refer to as two location living. And it's dynamic, it's fun, and we get out of the heat that is a real situation in Austin. I've never experienced heat quite like it.
Yeah, it can get quite hot there. Yeah, some of the health conferences I attend are sometimes in June, July, and yeah, that heat is very real for sure.
Yeah.
And there's lots of different reasons that people leave California. One reason to stay in Austin, especially if you are anywhere on an omnivore or carnivore diet, and anywhere on that spectrum, is you guys have amazing food. One of the best steaks I've ever had in my entire life was right in downtown Austin at Cooper. So no shortage of amazing places to eat while you're down there.
So, I could also work for the Chamber of Commerce for Austin because one thing that I love to do is when friends are coming into town, share with them all the places to visit and restaurants to try. So I invite you to ping me when you are in town next, and I'll give you a list of must tries when you're here.
That's amazing. You and I have opposite strategies, my friend. I try to be the Chamber of Commerce for Denver. So I send everybody to Denver. There's great restaurants over there. Broncos are there. Go check it out. Nothing to see here in Salt Lake City, Utah. Go over there is fine.
That's hilarious. I love
Different strategy.
it.
I wanted to start this conversation with something I find interesting, and I feel like you guys and yourself have done this very consciously. Your title is Chief Health Officer. I feel like most places that title would be Chief Medical Officer, but you chose,
Mm.
I want to say, I would think you would choose that very consciously. Can you tell us about your health title and or your job title and why you chose it?
Gosh, we could spend a good portion of this show talking about this very thing, which I won't. But yes, so you're right. When a company hires a person in a scientific role at a scientific company, they are most often looking towards a medical person to direct those initiatives. Is that always the right person? That was the question that I asked and had conversations with Jeffrey Pfeffer, who is a professor at the Stanford Business School for maybe 40 years, and he wrote the book Dying for a Paycheck. In that book, he writes about this exact same thing. Who is the right person to lead the initiatives around how to make a person healthy within an organization? And the chief health officer role can really be a variety of different things. So if you're at a non-scientific company, you could also have a chief health officer role let's say if you're a company of 1,000 person or more that is looking to at the health of the people who are working there. And so as a table of executives are thinking about strategies to make the company more profitable, that there should be an advocate, someone who is on in that conversation who is also thinking, but what kind of health toll will this have on our people? And then putting in ideas that make sure that we're taking care of the health of the people who are working there. That would be for a larger company. So you can see here a chief health officer role can do different things. At Qualia, since we are a science-oriented company, we are really not working in the medical sick care space. We are working in health promotion, what we call scientific wellness. And for that, we need to figure out all sorts of strategies that are aligned with helping a person to improve their health and health span in a variety of ways. And of course, while we do make supplements, it's not the end of our ambition. A big part of what we do is in education. So putting out what we hope is excellent health information and also talking, as you mentioned in my bio, creating protocols that say, okay, we have, let's say, a particular goal. Yes, supplementation can maybe be a part of that, but what is everything else that you can do to help maximize your impact from your efforts on achieving this thing that you hold as important in your life? So that is really fun for me because I have become a generalist by design. And in fact, some speaking that I've done, like at the Institute for Human Machine Cognition, is advocating for a new position in our healthcare system, one that it would be equivalent to a primary care doctor, your first point of contact when you are dealing with any sort of health issue. This would be your first point of contact, but in the health and the more of the wellness space. So I call that position the health performance expert. And this position is not just treating you, but training you. They are helping you. You're developing skill in your own life. So very different paradigm because with the medical side, it's about I'm the doctor, I have a lot of knowledge, and what I would hope is that you do what I say because I think it's going to be a great benefit to you. With the health performance expert side, it's different. It's all right, there is knowledge that exists. We need to make you more knowledgeable and better enabled to then change your pattern of living so that you now can take better care of yourself. And of course, we have a very valuable role in our healthcare team. So that idea has been completely underserved by our healthcare system, and it shouldn't be, uh, confrontational or oppositional. In an ideal world, you would have a very harmonized existence between the sick care and the self care side, and so that is some philosophical thinking that I've had on the role and introduced that when we started to have conversations with Qualia to say, hey, there's a lot of really good stuff that we can do here. Let's expand the vision of what this role actually is. And then we'll have that be a guiding principle for all the work that I'm contributing to at the company.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you for that explanation. And I'm not done asking you questions about the topic, but I feel like now would be actually a really good time to get some context as to how you became interested in research and science and how you became interested in human performance as well.
Yeah, yeah. So, my story goes back to playing sports when I was young, being very passionate about performing, wanting to do my best. I got injured. The injury made me take a deeper interest in wanting to understand how I could heal my body and get back onto the field or court. And that changed me. So, in a way, a very negative experience of twisting an ankle ultimately I think led to the career that I am in. So was maybe it was a good thing in some ways. And because I did start to read more about the body, I did become the default performance coach for my teams growing up. Like, what do you drink before you play? What's the best thing you should do after? All those questions totally engaged my mind, and that led to me pursuing. When I went to college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I took everything in the sports science department. And then eventually I did realize that I liked the physiology of exercise. So went to Florida State to pursue my master's in exercise physiology. And it was there was really two different tracks that were developing. One that was very practical and implementation based, and the other side was more um, physiologic and almost neuroscience based. In fact, it branched off, part of my department branched off and became the neuroscience department at Florida State after I left. And so long story short, I started to do work with Dean Ornish, then worked in bioinformatics, and eventually made my way into the pharmaceutical space where I worked in medical affairs, where I ran a research grant program for a company that had a medication for sleep in narcolepsy. I knew nothing about sleep, and then became completely enamored by the processes of sleep, how it affects our life. And so I started my PhD after working there for almost a decade. And I knew that I didn't want to become a sleep researcher, although that would have been an incredibly satisfying track. But I knew that I wanted to go into, you could say, public health, but I didn't know how to define it or describe it at the time. But what I was most interested in was not just sleep, but sleep, diet, exercise, environment, every determinant of health. And I realized then, how do we bring all of that together into some sort of cohesive program process that enables people to live differently in the context of a technology driven world that enables totally unhealthy patterns of living with predictable outcomes. And now we do need to learn in order to counteract those so we can be a little weird, right? We have to be weird, meaning that we have to live differently than how a lot of people live so we don't succumb to the predictable outcomes that you would expect. And that then led to me working on behavior. All right, so really what I want to do is change behavior. So I created a behavior model the first 6 months of my PhD program, analyzed a bunch of well-known behavioral models, turned those into my own behavior model. A behavior model can describe, predict, or explain when behavior change. You can also use it as a template to then enact behavior change. And then that became the foundation of humanOS, which is what I referred to as a digital health training platform. So all different ideas that people were almost confused at first. Well, is this a nutrition platform or is it a sleep platform or exercise? And I said, yes, it's all those things. And so that work led me, to meeting all sorts of interesting people. And then I eventually worked at Restore Hyper Wellness, where I became the chief health officer there and was looking at what I really loved about that opportunity was the fact that that chain or that organization had 250 different franchises. So there feel like there was an opportunity for real reach to get these ideas into the world. And I was there for a while. We ended up going in a different direction. And I actually made the recommendation. I said, you really should replace me with a medical doctor since you're going to be doing more medically oriented wellness activities, lifestyle activities like prescribing, testosterone replacement, things like that. I said, I will consult as long as you need, but my passion, my interest is really still in the scientific wellness space. And so that was a nice amicable departing, but even upon my recommendation. um, but that eventually I've been following the Qualia story for really since the inception. I've known the founders and I've always really liked what they are doing. And I really like supplements. I take them personally. I think they're misunderstood. And I think that they can serve as a very powerful contributing factor to helping us live better, support our health. People can sometimes look at them as a crutch, right? You try to take a supplement just to help you relieve you of your sins of not having a perfect lifestyle. It's hard to have a perfect lifestyle. And I think that they can actually serve as a catalyst that now will contribute to convergent behavior. So if you're doing something already, so you're taking a supplement for a particular purpose, you might do other things that support that process too. So that's my general perspective. And I think you can embed a lot of knowledge into an easily accessible form factor. And they're not a complete solution, but I think that they are an important part. They can play an important role in helping us with our health goals.
Wow. Interesting to think that all of that came from a twisted ankle, my friend.
Right?
That's amazing.
Who knows? That's the story I tell, right?
There
We
you
kind of
go.
have to we have to reverse engineer how we got here, but that all those moments were salient
Yeah.
in how I think I got here.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so that tees it up perfectly because I did want to return to research and or thinking. I'm going to ask this question in a very selfish way, but I think anybody can relate to this and think about this in their own lives.
Yeah.
With what I've done in my career, being a personal trainer, nutrition coach for almost 2 decades, I have planted my flag in the ketogenic space. I've learned enough. I've seen enough research. I've seen enough anecdote. I feel comfortable in that space. And I feel good there. I'm not yelling at everybody, vegans to, not be vegan and they're stupid. I'm just that my flag is planted. I feel
Yeah.
comfortable with, again, the things I've seen, the conferences I've gone to, the presentations and studies, everything I've dove into. I feel comfortable there. But also when you're into studying anything, you have to always be like willing to set aside your ideas or learn something new or different. So for anybody that has had the amount of experience that you've had doing research, learning things, how are you able to balance those two things? Because they're both kind of true. Like you learn more stuff and you might feel like your confidence, factor goes up by a little bit, but you still don't know everything and we need to keep learning. So how are you able to kind of manage the knowledge, the wisdom, but also the humility to do good science?
Yeah. By the way, I've dedicated my life to this area. I feel that way all the time. You have to, I like the saying, form strong opinions and hold them loosely, to which to me means you do the research to feel confident in understanding a particular position, but you don't have your identity become formed to that. So in the face of competing information, you that might yield a pathway that could be more amenable to a better outcome, that you don't become sort of this person who is zealous around defending maybe outdated ideas. And that I think does happen, and I understand why. How we live does become a part of our identity. And so I think that's okay temporarily, but I think the pursuit is not being X, Y, or Z. The pursuit is how do I take care of myself the best? And the reality is that can even change over the course of a lifespan. And I'm writing a book. I talk about how human health changes over the life history of a human being. And we are very different people by decade, right? Our interests, motivations, our desires, our physiology changes considerably. And so what I tell people is that you have a lifetime to exploit the knowledge that you gain around what helps you feel better. And so don't feel you will feel overwhelmed in moments. Don't feel like you have to learn everything in a day or in a week or in a couple month period. But health is a process goal. It is a process of staying connected to the information, making it a part of your daily to weekly experience, and then your practice, which is how that knowledge that you've gained translates into maintaining a pattern that benefits from your knowledge. I used to have a saying that, the smartest person in the world is equal to, on a particular subject, is equal to the dumbest person in the world if they don't take action on what they know, right?
That's a really good call.
So those are all really interesting ideas to explore. But what I would tell anyone who is feeling overwhelmed, because we have an overwhelming amount of information now, is that's normal. Go easy on yourself, keep at it, and pay attention to how you feel. There's obviously a lot of overlap and similarities being human, and yet at the same time, we are truly unique beings. Where we stand in life, the aggregation of accumulated exposures from, good and bad types of stressors in our lives, we are a very unique person. And so that is okay. And trying to develop your mind to be a sensitive instrument to things that really work is, that's a skill in itself. One of the benefits of getting older is that we do become more sensitive to what really does and does not work. When we're young, we can be protected, right? We can go out, do silly things, drink alcohol, we can abuse our bodies in some ways and wake up the next day and be pretty robust still. And when we get older, we can see very clearly what does and does not work in a way that's a superpower, right? And so you have more sensitive feedback to things that are actually good for you. And so lean into that, pay attention, and, to the degree that you can get objective feedback, there is no perfect measurement of health. There never will be. Health is a latent variable, meaning that it's impossible to fully measure, but that doesn't mean that we can't measure it in an effective way that, while incomplete, is still useful, right? We can look at our blood measurements. We can see if markers are off, and we could do things to try to get those markers back into normative territory. That's useful, right? It's not a complete view of health, but it can still help us maintain, take care of ourselves. So those are some ideas that, are really important to talk about. But the main one I'll just repeat here is It's a lifelong process. Try to enjoy it as much as you can because what you're really not just learning science, you're learning about your this body that you are inhabiting and taking care of. You're learning about you. When you learn about health, you're learning about you. And that makes it more personalized. And I think that's useful for behavior change.
I love that. Wow. Yeah, I absolutely love that. I've got two thoughts there. One time I was at a conference and somebody got on stage, I can't remember who, and said, what is the most valuable kind of study that you can do? And of course, all of us in the audience rumble like, oh, it's a randomized controlled trial. He says, no, it's an N of one as long as you're the N of one. That is so along the lines of like how you are feeling, the changes that you're making, do them slow, have fun with it, do it gradually, and make sure it's paying you back because it is very subjective. So I love that. And my other thought is it seems to be that when something is true, it seems more and more and more true the more information that comes out. It's more unifying. You get more pieces of the puzzle and it makes even more sense. It fits in with multiple fields of study. And so that to me, contrasted to something like our ideas about saturated fat and cholesterol and heart attacks as well, there's like more holes, we learn different things, and cholesterol doesn't seem to matter. It seems like weaker and weaker and weaker the further it goes. So those are kind of my two thoughts on what you just said.
Yeah. So I fully agree with the N of one experiment. And we're getting into a time where the power of analysis of an individual is going to be increasingly beneficial in terms of the direction it provides and what we should be doing and not doing. That's exciting, particularly with AI, because we can now capture with multiomic analysis, which is looking at your metabolites, which is looking at, your genome, your transcriptome, on and on. There's so many things that we can now assess that it's overwhelming. But with robust AI models, we can try to find the signal amongst the noise that says, hey, this is actually important to you, and it's something that you might never have even thought to pay attention to. So that I'm very excited about that. And I'll say this, that, Carl Jung, who's a famous philosopher and psychoanalyst of the past, he said that his biggest fear of was applying statistics, which are meant for populations, to individuals, and that's what we've done with standardized medicine.
Okay. Yeah.
And because I'll give you an example. So the National Sleep Foundation recommends 7 to 9 hours of sleep. All right, or actually, what they'll say is, we want to get 8 hours of sleep. Okay, they used to say that. Now that was an average, but if you, Casey, actually the biological sleep that you need happens to be 7 hours, now you think that you are not sleeping enough and might start taking sleep medications to sleep longer. Right? What if I say that you need 8 hours of sleep, but you individually need 9? I've now prescribed sleep deprivation, a non-optimal amount of sleep for you. So you can see right there with that very clean, simple example, how the application of population statistical averages can really be misleading as a directive for an individual. Now, you can always take that information as a part of the what can guide you, but you have to hold it loosely and not think of it as a hard and cold fact. And even scientists can sometimes, and people in the medical field can have a hard time with that.
Well, being an expert on sleep, you would know that could be different in a year. You might need 9 hours in the winter and 6 hours in the summertime. You make a dietary change, your sleep may actually get even a little bit more efficient. So you might be complaining you're not sleeping enough, but you're also not tired during the day. So there is so much context to that yeah, applying a population study is not going to help the individual nearly as much. So yeah, I really love that explanation.
And I'll say something too about the concept of, let's say, the ketogenic diet. So if the normative data around your blood markers was assessed in a population doing a normal diet, like an omnivore diet or a standard American diet, and that of course has been changing over decades, but now do all of the markers mean the same thing that they did under different validation criteria? Now, a couple of things there. It's often true that when you don't have really crystal clear data on a new perspective, that can lead to people saying, see, look, no, it's actually fine. It's not an issue. Where the possibility is true that that might be you might have a whole different context and you have to reinterpret this. But you do see that quite a bit. Like, oh, it's grass-fed beef, and therefore none of the things that applied previously apply currently. And so what I'm cautious of, like, what is the right perspective to take? And what is the risk that we're thinking about? So I think the right perspective is to maintain caution, maintain, be sober about it, but also be open to the possibility that what was true under a different context is not totally true under this new context. And that, you see that like there's a little shift to how something that was thought to be dangerous before. And then in the absence of data that shows that this new way of doing is not healthy, they overstate claims that it is. So
Yeah, that's a very good point.
yeah, yeah, and time will tell, but I kind of leave that up to individuals to sort of assess how they feel with their healthcare team, their doctors, the people that they put around them, and their own personal feedback. And but that it's a gray area window, and sometimes people learn, what, I was wrong, and sometimes people learn, what, I was right, and people that said that I was not doing it right, they were wrong. So yeah, it's like I said, time will tell.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I love the perspective. And now I think it's a great time to jump into creatine and creatine research. I mean, if you've been in the health space, you've come across something with creatine in it. And, once you know a few things about it, it's easy to understand why you would get so excited about it. This supplement is just continuing to knock everything out of the park. We learn more and more and more about it all the time. And it just seems to come up roses every single time. So tell us a little bit about, how you got excited about creatine, and then we could deep dive into what creatine even is.
Yeah. So you'll get a kick out of this, Casey. I'll tell a story, but the very first research study that I ever took part in was in the mid 1990s during my master's degree at exercise science. And we were looking at the effects of creatine on something called the Wingate Power Test, which I'll explain what that test is. So the test there's a couple of different ways that it can be performed, but you do a maximal effort on a cycle ergometer, like a stationary bike, where you will go for 15 seconds all out, then you wait 45 seconds, and then you repeat that 5 times. In this particular test, there is a group of people standing around you while you're doing this test, screaming for you to work your hardest. And almost like, the analogy with like the speed of light, like the closer you get to it, like the farther away you are from it. There's a weird math there, but every percentage point higher that you get above 90, it's like exponential jumps in how hard it was. So I did that test as a baseline, and then after a loading period of creatine for 2 weeks. And after each test, I could not move off of the floor for 45 minutes. Not like, oh, I'm really tired, I'd like to lay here. I couldn't get up. It was,
Wow.
and I don't think I've ever been actually quite that exhausted ever again. But that was the study. And so, but the point of it is that only a few years before that, Roger Harris had performed a study that showed that taking creatine could increase ballistic type of exercise performance, so sprinting and jumping and burst activity by 1 to 3%, which sounds modest, but in the context of, let's say, an Olympic event that only lasts 10 seconds, that can be the difference between not medaling at all, not even getting into the final race, or winning gold. And so a man named Steve Jennings at that time, he was handed a paper by Harris, and then he said it was his task to say, okay, how do we get this to the British athletes for the 1993 Barcelona Olympics? And at that time, the global supply of creatine was only 1 kilogram in the entire world.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
There was no manufacturing. I mean, creatine had been found in the mid 18th century, so we knew it existed. It's where it got its name, creas, as muscle meat, because about 95% of your creatine is stored in your muscle. But it just sat there in textbooks. We were aware that it was there, but nobody really knew what it did. And then I'd actually like to go back and study the history here. What made Roger Harris interested in studying this compound? that's something that I need to like put on my to-do list because I love the history of any subject that I study. My PhD professor always said, a good scientist is a good historian.
Love that.
But anyhow, so the 1 kilogram amount of creatine is really only enough for one athlete for 50 days. It's not nearly enough to help an entire Olympic team, or at least those with whom the effects of creatine would have a positive effect, at least considering the mechanism of action at that time, what we thought, who we thought it would help, given how we thought how it worked. And so they needed to figure out how they were going to commercialize this in a way, or at least manufacture it. So Jennings started to work with a local pharmaceutical company, and they created these effervescent tablets, which then enabled them to give the right dose to the athletes. And the story goes that Linford Christie won the gold medal in the Barcelona 100-meter sprint, which is what my favorite event always. And after he won the gold, the story broke out, and then that really changed the field. People became incredibly interested in this, and so by 1995, the in the US, the market size was about $30 million. So just after a few years, it had grown to a $30 million market. And by 3 years after that, it had grown fivefold beyond that to 150 million. So it basically had gone from, elite Olympic level athletes to then anybody who wanted to train like them, any sort of athlete, then to college sports, professional sports, and then just your everyday gym goer that was doing weightlifting or anything that's trying to improve their athletic potential. So that story is really what launched creatine into its existence as a product that people take. But then the story really gets more interesting around 2010 because for that 15-year period from like mid 1990s to 2010, the athletic enhancing the ergogenic effects of creatine dominated the perspective of what creatine could do. And around the 2010s, there was already some work coming out suggesting that it could have beneficial effects on reaction time, brain performance, in other ways, memory in particular. But it hadn't really been looked at too rigorously. There was a study in 1998 that was like kind of pretty close to like the origins that I would say made some people start to think differently. But really around 2010, I would say that the research field widened its lens on what creatine could be useful for. And at this point, now 15 years beyond that, I think we're still just at the tip of the iceberg of what this might actually be helpful for. So that's the origin story of creatine, and it's a fascinating one.
It is fascinating. And just to think that, like, yeah, a few years ago, I would have said, yes, this is for athletic performance. It's
Yeah,
for not only like all athletic performance, it's for certain things. Like if I was in
yeah,
a cycling season, I wouldn't want to take creatine. If I was in an ice hockey playing season, I would. I'd want the extra, weight, and I would think that's more explosive and blah, blah, blah. But not only that, we're talking about it's not just, specific performance. I'm trying to figure out a way to get this into my 94-year-old grandpa, for example. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like it just seems like the benefits across so many different fields for so many ages for both genders for kid like there seems to be a lot of really cool applications. And so I hope you're right in the sense that we are just scratching the surface. This is the tip of the iceberg because to think about what this can be used for and for who it would work for, it seems pretty wide.
Yeah, yeah. You, a absolutely critical piece of what health is our ability to make energy to fuel processes that maintain the body and help it adapt to stressors and challenges that we face in our environment. And so energy is a real key. And we only store, for example, with ATP, like 150 to 200 grams of ATP in the body, but we remake and resynthesize our entire body weight in ATP every single day.
It's incredible.
I know. I know. Every cell is fueled by 10 million ATP mediated reactions every second. Staggering.
That's
I love
wild.
it. I
That's so
love those.
cool.
So fun. Yeah. So, where does creatine fit into this? And so I think it's a good time to talk about this from first principles. So instead of thinking of this as an ergogenic aid that fuels sports performance, it's really a compound that is contributing to stabilization of energy processes under particular conditions. We don't understand all of those conditions as clearly yet because we're seeing surprising effects in some parts of the body, like even endurance exercise, right? That, like you were saying, that's not something that you would take it for because you add body weight. Endurance athletes are really cautious about how much what they weigh. They want to be light. Um, but yeah, so I think it might be contributing in ways that we still have to learn through further exploration. But the way that it works is just to go through some very simple biochemistry. We know that ATP, excuse me, is the main energy currency of the cell. So that's adenosine molecule with three different phosphates, and it donates one of its phosphates, this high energy phosphate, to fuel everything, recovery, ion channel maintenance, um, everything that you can think of in the body requires energy in order to do its job. And it is that process of donating this energy phosphate. It's like the exchange of cash, right, in your cell. I even came up with an analogy for that. I'll try it on you in a moment. You can tell me if it's good or not, or I have to go back to the drawing board. But what creatine does is it is it's most of it is stored in the body. About 60 to 70% of creatine is stored as phosphocreatine. That's creatine plus a phosphate. And so, under certain conditions, when your body is needing ATP at a pace faster than it can resynthesize it under other energetic processes, creatine donates that phosphate and it can keep the energy flowing for a few more seconds. And so, for exercise, that would feel the real intuitive way to understand that everybody who takes creatine and loads with it says, wow, I can do a few more reps at this weight than I could 2 weeks ago. Uh, and that I think is the real intuitive way to understand what that energetic contribution feels like.
Okay, gotcha. Amazing. Most, I'm surprised actually that it seems to be a lot of people actually know that creatine is now being shown to be very helpful in the brain. It's not as much of a surprise to a lot of people, which I find fascinating. But can
Yeah.
you explain what's going on in the brain, what we know about creatine, and how that's helpful in the brain itself?
Yeah, so creatine in that study from 1998 did show that taking creatine over 4 weeks did lead to some improvements in cognitive performance. And so we can go and we can talk about dosing later and ways to increase stores, but the brain is interesting because of course we have the blood-brain barrier, and the blood-brain barrier is privileging which compounds can get in and which ones cannot. And we have what are called these astrocytic feet, which is an area of exchange of from it's sampling the blood and it's seeing what it can bring in. And those astrocytic feet in the blood-brain barrier do not have the creatine transporter. So the creatine transporter is something, it's the creatine transporter 1, and it will actually help to move creatine into muscle. So your muscles have a lot of the creatine transporter, but the blood-brain barrier doesn't. So how the heck does it get into the brain? Well, um, let me tell you about how creatine is synthesized because your body does make it and you eat it. And so let's talk about those two things because then that'll inform a little bit more about the brain. But this is some work we should do first. So the way that it's made in the body is that it starts in the kidneys. This is the endogenous synthesis starts in the kidneys. Then a incomplete creatine molecule moves to the liver where it is completed. Creatine is completed, and then it enters into the bloodstream, and it circulates around the body, and it is absorbed with the transporter in these high energy tissues like muscle. So like I said, 95% of your creatine in your body is stored in muscles. So that's one way that we make creatine. Your muscles do not make it. They have offloaded that project to other parts of your body, but they benefit from what's in the bloodstream. Then you have dietary sources. And these only come from meat or animal sources, I should say. So red meat is around, 4 to 5 grams per kilogram. Fish is about the same. So, herring, salmon, tuna. Pork is a little bit less, chicken's a little bit less. But vegetarians really contain a negligible, like vegetarian sources of calories contain a negligible amount of creatine. So without very reliably, vegetarians and vegans, they really rely on endogenous synthesis. And I do want to talk about that more in a moment, but I want to keep with this thread. So yeah, so if you have, a high meat diet, you are probably getting about maybe 1 or 2 grams from endogenous synthesis and 1 or 2 grams from your diet. And we're losing about 2 grams of creatine a day, especially if you're physically active. So you can see that there's amount that's being made, amount that's being consumed, and there's amount that's being used. And then, of course, what we found is that if you take creatine supplementally, you are increasing the amount in the blood, and you can, in a way, hypersaturate your muscles. What's interesting, people talk about like bloating and weight gain, but creatine is a very hydrophilic or water-loving molecule. And so it is pulling, when it gets transferred into muscle, it's pulling about 50 grams of water per gram of creatine. That's why you don't feel bloated, because the idea of bloating is a lot of extracellular water where you feel squishy, you could pinch your skin. Intercellular water is more the feeling of when you have just finished a workout and your muscles feel a little more full. That would be more intercellular water. So most people will report, having been on creatine for a few weeks, that they feel their muscles feel a little tighter, which is a feeling that most people really like, right? You feel like a little, yeah, including me. Yeah. So that is important things about where we usually get it, how we make it. Now, the brain doesn't how does it get into the brain? Because we do find it in the brain. Well, the brain can actually make creatine, unlike other tissues, except for like I said before, where it's mostly made, it starts in the kidneys, goes to the liver, is completed in the liver, then circulates. But the brain has certain enzymes that enable it to make some amount of creatine. Now, we were thinking, gosh, it just can't get into the brain, but that doesn't appear to be true, because when you do take it, you can see increases in stores from baseline assessments from either imaging or sacrificing an animal and measuring the amount of creatine in tissues. And you can see that it increases about, somewhere between 8 and up to 16% from what I've seen. So actually a decent amount. Muscles, by the way, by comparison, will increase reliably. The stores of creatine will increase about 20%. So not as much as muscle. Uh, Probably, I would say conservatively half of that. But some studies have shown that it's up to like 16%. So decent amounts. The real interesting thing is that during stressful situations like sleep loss, it appears that the brain becomes more amenable to taking in creatine from the bloodstream. So it is the acidity of the conditions of sleep loss that the sleep loss conditions will create a more acidic environment, and it'll increase ammonia stores. And what that ends up doing is it will affect the transport mechanism across the blood-brain barrier, and your brain becomes like a sponge for creatine. So if you are experiencing sleep deprivation, there was a really interesting study by Najad that showed if you take 0.3 grams per kilogram. So for me, I'm 215 pounds. And if I take, yeah, so for me, that would be after, like, let's say I only got 4 hours of sleep and I need somewhere closer to like 7 or 8, and I'm feeling awful, that if I took 35 grams of creatine in the day, that I would feel much, much better. I would not feel, sleep loss is miserable. And we could talk a little bit about how that's working, because it is pretty fascinating. And I think connecting to the mechanism is useful.
Wow. Thank you for explaining that as well. You just addressed so many of the myths that I hear, or the pushback that I get, especially from women who,
Yeah.
like, if you mention or they felt before that they took creatine and they gained a few pounds and they hated it. You do hear the misunderstandings about bloating, which I always wonder about as far as like dosing, if that could be something. But I'm glad you addressed all of those. Can you explain the importance of creatine for women and women's health?
Yeah. So this is, I think, one of the most interesting areas for the entire field of creatine. And women, they've really been underserved in the research because typically research dollars go to where interest lies. And so at first it was more of a male dominated, uh, the ergogenic effects in males was met by the market demand. And so there was more research to try to figure that out. And of course, women are athletic and perform high level athletics as well, but still, a lot of the studies were mostly men. And so even to this day, we have less information on creatine in women, but I think that it is an area that we will see an increasing amount of research on with tremendous potential benefits, ranging from supporting stabilizing energy that can fluctuate during a monthly menstrual cycle, to perimenopause, where you have more extreme fluctuations in energy, and then post menopause, where you're losing estrogen, and and then you're also that's contributing to an increase in bone loss and an increase in muscle loss. And so it seems that in general, creatine can support female oriented health, some specific aspects of that throughout the lifespan, but it becomes increasingly important as we get older. And we might be able to argue the same for men, but due to women specific issues, the beneficial effects of creatine in women, because of those reasons that I just mentioned, seem very, very clear.
Yeah, got it. That'll be interesting to see how that pans out, but it sure makes a lot of sense. We teed this up a little bit. Let's do talk. I'm going to load these three things into one question. I know it'll be a big question, but dosing,
Yeah.
timing, loading. Dosing, timing, loading. How do you think about those things? How do you explain like how much somebody should take, when they should take it? Is it beneficial before a workout, after a workout? Does any of that matter? And then with creatine, they've talked forever about a loading phase, maybe 20 or 30 grams for a week, and then you back off. What do you think about all of that?
Yeah, yeah. So the typical dose has been 5 grams per day. That is the most studied dose, and the most studied form is creatine monohydrate. There's different forms, creatine hydrochloride, creatine ethyl ester. Each of those forms have advocates for why they are superior, but really they've never shown to be better than really the old standard creatine monohydrate. So that continues to get the most research on it. And hey, if other forms get enough research behind them to say, yeah, this is better for this particular reason, for this specific purpose, great. We'll have more diversity in the field. But we do know that creatine monohydrate is, when we think about it, that is really what's been mostly studied. So we have more confidence there. And there are a couple of different ways that you can start taking it. You can take 5 grams a day. It can come in pills or powders. You put it into a jar, you mix it with water, you drink it down. It can be gritty. It doesn't dissolve very well. It doesn't have a strong or awful taste, but some people don't like the grittiness. Um, a good amount can be left in the glass on the side of the glass if you're not like constantly swirling it. Does that resonate with your experience?
Oh, absolutely. That's why I started dry scooping it actually.
Oh, really? Yeah. Um, but if you do that, just 5 grams per day, you will increase your stores by about 20% over like 2.5 to 3 weeks, sometimes maybe even 4, if you just take 5 grams a day. So that introduced the idea of a loading dose, which means that for 5 to 7 days, you take 20 grams of creatine. So 4 5-gram doses spread somehow throughout the day. We'll talk about timing in a moment. And then that is going to help your stores reach their maximal saturation, which is about 20% increase. Of course, depending on baseline, if you're a vegetarian, vegan, you're going to have more room for growth, if you will. And or if you just eat a low meat diet, even if you're not eating much meat, remember most of the creatine that you consume comes from animal sources and de minimis amounts from plant sources. So think about your own diet there. But yeah, so that's going to saturate your muscle levels sooner. So a lot of people do that. They'll take 5 grams 4 times a day. Now, because of the way that creatine works and because of the way that sleep works, some people can experience like, oh, I was really wide awake. And so I like to take it, all of those doses, if I'm doing a loading phase, earlier in the day, let's say before 1 p.m. There isn't a hard absolute number there. That's a reasonable amount. Individual mileage may vary, right? You try it yourself. The reason why you wouldn't just take it all at once is because some people can experience GI issues. So if your body is not used to it and you take 20 grams right away, remember it's hydrophilic. It's pulling water with it. It can go right through you. Uh, so that's why it's recommended to take 5 grams, wait an hour, do another five, wait an hour, do another five. Most people don't have issues with that. What I recommend for people beyond that is even to start with 2.5 grams. Your first day, always go light, see how you do. Just do 5 grams on that one day, split in half, see how your body does, and kind of ease into it. And the reason I say that is because when you don't have a personal experience with the supplement, if your first experience is a bad one, then you might give up on something that otherwise could have had real benefits in your life. So,
Yeah, you're
what's most important, that you have muscle saturation at day 5 or 7, or that you now continuously take this and reap the benefits of better energetics in your body in perpetuity? Clearly the
okay.
latter.
Yeah, gotcha.
Clearly the
Okay, perfect. And I've heard to get the physical benefits, the 5 gram dosage as a maintenance is just fine. But to get more of the mental cognitive benefits, the dosage needs about like 8 to 10. Is that true from what you know?
Yeah, so that there's now some research that suggests, so think of it this way. Um, this imagery works for me, but I wonder if I can communicate it well. So imagine a slope, a concrete slope on a hill, and there's all sorts of holes in the slope. And you're at the top of with a bucket of water, and you pour it down. And every day you pour that bucket down. Well, it goes into the top holes, and it doesn't make it down to the holes at the bottom because it's all getting absorbed by the top holes, right? And then it's used during the day. So the next day you pour it again, and it only goes into the top holes. That is equivalent to it just going into your muscles with 5 grams. So the idea is when you take a 10-gram dose, you can help to saturate the muscles, and there's more left over to actually get into the brain and other tissues.
Got it.
That's the
That's a great
that's
analogy.
okay, good.
I like it.
Okay,
We'll
good.
take
It
it.
works. It works for me.
That's awesome. Well, okay, so I used to mix it up, and you're right, it tends to kind of mix okay, but it can kind of build up on the side of a blender bottle. And I just got sick of doing so many dishes every day with my creatine serving, and so I just learned, like I said, to dry scoop it. So I would put, the serving of creatine directly on my tongue. You're right, it is a little bit gritty. 5 grams is not too much, so it's not like putting a scoop of whey protein in your mouth where you're choking on whatever. Like it's just enough to sit on your tongue. You chase with water, and in a few seconds, it's really like kind of dissolved. You were kind enough to send me your product, which I've tried. And one of the things I notice, the grittiness, there is no grittiness when I take the Qualia product. It's so very fine. It dissolves even faster. And I also can taste something different because there is a bit of an electrolyte component, the magnesium that you put in with the creatine. So tell us what you guys decided to do when you were developing this product and why your product is not just creatine monohydrate.
Yeah. Yeah. So, whenever we set out to work on a product, if you look at Qualia's products, some of them have a lot of ingredients. They're very robust, and we tend to take a systems approach. So, how do we support a system versus just give it the ingredient? But is there anything else that we can do so that we can help it absorb better or to work better in the body? And in this case, the formulation that we came up with was not, we don't design for complication, we design for efficacy. And so first of all, we wanted to start with the most tried and true form of creatine, but in a micronized form that is called opticreatine. And so it is creatine monohydrate, but it dissolves much better into water. In fact, I don't know if it would work as well dry scooping it, because if it's more like fine powder, you might choke on it like you would protein powder. You could tell me, but be careful with that, Casey. I want because it is a lot. Think of it closer to like a powdered sugar versus your salt. Like the salt is the equivalent of like a creatine monohydrate. The micronized version is going to be more like powdered sugar in terms of its consistency. But if you stir it up, if you stir for a little bit, it almost completely dissolves into the water. So that's one thing. That form is useful, and we think that might even help with some absorption as well, because the grittiness is more likely to, move through you if the molecules are stay undissolved. Next, we know that the creatine transporter needs sodium in order to work. So this is an SLC transporter. That's a huge family of transporters. There's over 400 different types. They move all sorts of, compounds into and out of cells. And this is the creatine porter transporter is SLC6. So that is the broad family, and then A8, which is there's a couple of things that use this type of transporter, like neurotransmitters and other things too, but it relies on sodium. And so we added a little bit of sea salt because it's actually sodium and chloride that are involved in the sodium transporter. And so of course we're getting enough of those in our diet, but if let's say you have creatine on an empty stomach, which a lot of people do throughout the day, you're probably not absorbing as much as you would otherwise if you had some sodium and chloride co-occurring with the ingestion of the creatine. That's the idea. Simple. It's a simple idea. It's not going to be massively transformative, but we think you're getting more return on your investment with that addition. And that's not even that new. Like this has been something that's been used for a long time, but a lot of products don't have it. And then, of course, what's really interesting is the addition of another form of creatine called magnet creatine. So it's creatine bound to magnesium. And it turns out that about 80%, depending on where in your cells, most of your ATP, your free ATP, is bound to magnesium in your cell. And we know that 50% of the United States is not meeting the minimal required, the adequate intake levels. We also know that almost across every nutrient that you can look at, that the amount of what is considered adequate intake is really around trying to prevent the appearance of quickly occurring disease, but it's not optimal. And so I always like to look at hunter-gatherer levels of estimates of what the intake value is in that type of population that's eating a different diet than we are. And we know that for magnesium, the Institute of Medicine recommends about 410 milligrams per day for men. And for women, it's 320 milligrams per day. And plenty of studies now are coming out that show levels of closer to 600 milligrams a day have meaningful differences in brain health over a 10-year trajectory, right? So I think my point is that there's room for additional. We're not even meeting the minimums, and meeting the minimums is not even optimal. So
Got it.
that the idea then there is to add this form of creatine, which probably helps with some absorption because it's chelated, and also would help with energy, the energy system overall. And so, yeah, we think that we're like, I think that's our optimized version of creatine, and we didn't chuck other ingredients in there. We thought that was a way to maximize the benefit of this already awesome product.
Got it. Okay. So I've been taking Qualia for a few weeks now. I really like it. The saltiness is actually pretty good. Like it tastes pretty good. It does dissolve really quickly. I haven't had any choking incidents doing the dry scooping thing. So
Okay. Okay. Good to know.
good to report back on that one. And to be fair, like you mentioned earlier, like a vegetarian, vegan, there's so much more of a gap to be able to fill that you're going to notice a huge performance. Where I'm looking at myself, I've taken creatine off and on for 15, 20 years. I've always eaten meat. I've been carnivore for almost 7 years. I take creatine religiously. I'm probably not going to notice like as much of an effect as most people, to be fair.
Yeah. Mhm.
But what do people report when they switch? If somebody is already taking normal creatine and they start taking the Qualia creatine, what kind of things have you heard?
So most of the things that we've heard so far, because the product is quite new, is really more experiential. Like I just like how it tastes and I like how it dissolves more. I agree with you. I don't think you're going to say, yeah, creatine totally didn't work for me and your form did. I don't think that's the degree that we are thinking of. What I would imagine as a possibility, but we've not done a study where I could confidently make a claim on this, is that some of the things that might be harder to tell like, stores in your brain, brain related, sleep related factors that you would get a bigger boost if you were to do a head-to-head trial. That's what I would guess, but we could totally be wrong, right? But that's what I would guess.
Okay, excellent.
If I were to translate that, I would say that there might be some tissues that are benefiting even more given the formulation than just creatine monohydrate itself, and that could be in your kidneys, it could be in your gut, it could be who knows where. But I would just rather take. I mean, personally, I'm like, all right, what's the best form of something? If I'm going to do it, and I think it matters, what do I think is the best form of it? That applies to really all supplements.
Yeah. Okay. Well said. I love that. Message number one, take creatine. Message
Yeah,
number two is like, if you want the most optimized version, this is pretty much it. And
yeah.
man, supplements are such a quagmire anyway. It's so tough to navigate and understand, what people are actually putting in bottles and what is actually there. Tell us about Qualia and the kind of quality of your supplements, all of them.
It's one of the. I joined the company over the summer. We've known each other for a long time, and they like the education that I was providing, and I take their supplements. So we started to chat. But you're right that in a way, the field of supplements is always tarnished by people that aren't doing some things right. And that's often depicted as people who are acting nefariously in some way. And oftentimes it's not even that. It's just they don't have the standards that are ensuring quality that you would want. And so in the fabric of the company, it's about, okay, for every part of the process of manufacturing, delivering stability, what would you do? And so we tend to, for example, with our ingredients, use ones that are, shown standardization, trademarked compounds, versions of a nutrient. So you're not just getting the idea of something, but you're actually getting what you want, right? And the company that sells that, oftentimes it's a little bit more expensive than like an alternative, but they've gone through the validation process to say yes. So at the end of the day, you're getting exactly this amount of this thing that is on the label. So I
Got it.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. This has been an amazing conversation. I really appreciate all of your knowledge and wisdom around this. And I just really appreciated the general talk about doing research in general, how to be careful about the ideas we have and not to fall too much in love with our own ideas. So I'm
Yeah.
really grateful for you and taking time to be hosted on our show today. Where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you and your work? I believe you might have a bit of a discount code for our listeners as well. That's pretty cool.
Yes, I'll let you say what the discount code is because I think that they share it with you, but I'm not sure. But do you have that on you?
I do, absolutely. So the coupon code is Boundless Body. It's all capital letters, and it says listeners get an additional 15% off any Qualia order. That's pretty good.
It's great. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh, Yeah, so what I would recommend is, I was saying earlier that Qualia is a lot more than a pill company. We're also an information company. We put a lot of time writing, thinking about health science and shaping an environment for that would allow people to take part on all sorts of things that are going to help them, not just what the knowledge that we try to embed in the pill.
got
So
it.
I'll give you an example. Like we just wrote an article about brain rot, which was the Webster's 2000 Word of the Year 2024. It's such an interesting article. It talks about the ways that social media usage will shape neuroplasticity in a way that then will predict a type of usage where you're constantly checking your phone. And then we talk about ways to prevent that. So how to put in some safeguards, what to look for, and we write about like individual ingredients in a complex formulation where we get an opportunity to do like a 2,000 word deep dive into something that shows you all the cool science that we're aware of. So I would say go to qualialife.com/blog. That we have information about our research there. You can find our products, but overall, the Qualia brand is here to support your health, and we can do so in more than one way. So make sure to take advantage of all the things that we're doing.
Okay, amazing. And they can find like social media stuff on the website as well.
Totally. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, awesome. We'll link all of that up in the show notes. We have to turn you loose because you have a car drive to a bit of a competition this weekend. Is that right?
Yes, my boys are competing in a jiu-jitsu competition in Dallas, so we're driving 3.5 hours up tonight, and I hope my 7-year-old makes weight. Yeah, he
That's amazing.
literally has to be under 55.9 pounds, and he weighed this morning 55.9 pounds on our scale.
Whoa, man.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
wish me luck.
Yeah, best of luck if he's in a sauna suit and like running back and forth in the
Yeah.
showers the way people used to do in wrestling. Maybe that will help. Well, awesome. Best of luck to them. I hope they have a great competition. Travel safe, and thank you so very much for taking time to be on our show today. We really appreciate you.
Thanks so much for having me on, Casey. I really enjoyed our conversation. Hope we get a chance to interact and chat more in the future.
Yeah, let's do that for sure. I would really appreciate that. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.